Maude pulled her suitcase down from the high shelf in the bedroom closet and set it open on her bed. She was staying with her friend Lindsay, who had generously offered her guest room upon hearing about the breakup. "You can stay as long as you need," Lindsay told her. Maude wasn't sure if her friend meant until David came to his senses or until she did. Days after the abrupt end of her 7-year relationship, Maude returned to the apartment she had shared with David to gather her things, still struggling to process the shock and the unanswered question of why it had ended. "There isn't someone else," David had assured her. It wasn't about her stance on having children, something he had always insisted he was fine with. It wasn't any one thing at all. "We've just become different people," he said. "We've run our course. It's time to move on." With no clear plan, Maude started packing. She emptied her closet first, then her dresser. Next came perfume bottles, half-used prescription bottles, a bathrobe, and a hair straightener. She was about to close the suitcase when she remembered a pair of socks she hadn't seen yet. Black, polka-dotted with Maude and David's smiling faces, a Christmas gift from his mother, their first year together. Maude had already fallen for him completely, even before he had started calling her his girlfriend. It had taken the socks and the gift tag that read, "For David and his girlfriend," for him to finally say the word. The memory of that moment made fresh tears well up in her eyes. She found the socks under the bed, being worn by David, lying amongst the dust bunnies. But this wasn't the David who had just ended things with her. This was the David from that first Christmas, the distant 28-year-old who still brought his laundry home for his mother to do and hesitated to label their relationship. That David would never have been able to look his girlfriend of 7 years in the eye and tell her they had run their course. She lifted David and dropped him onto the bed. He was so young, handsome too, but in an easy, approachable way, and that's what had drawn her to him. She had been so taken by the mix of his looks and his warm humor that she had been willing to overlook his flaws. Hell, she had even found them endearing. He was a project, something to fix. She had worked so hard to help him grow into the man who would one day gently shatter her heart into pieces. In a way, this was all her fault. She shook her head at the thought, then grabbed his legs and flipped him into the suitcase. She dragged the suitcase into the bathroom to grab her bath scrubber and a few items from the medicine cabinet. Steam billowed out as she opened the door. David was in the shower, singing into the bath scrubber like a microphone. They had a habit of singing together in the shower. She couldn't remember when it started, but it had quickly become a cherished ritual. "Loving you isn't the right thing to do," he sang, his baritone echoing against the tile. "How can I ever change things I feel?" she answered, her voice catching slightly. He had always been terribly embarrassed by the idea of singing in public. He would only sing for her, and only in the shower. "If I could, baby, I'd give you my world." She had always loved that this moment of intimacy and vulnerability was theirs alone, that he only ever felt comfortable singing to her. This had been hers, and hers alone. "How can I, when you won't take it from me?" Her eyes burned with fresh tears, but she blinked them back. She blew her nose, then pulled open the shower curtain, wrapped her arms around his waist, and hoisted him over her shoulder, folding him over her back. Then she dropped him and the bath scrubber into the suitcase. Was there any easy way to disentangle two lives so intertwined? The living room, in particular, was a shrine to their relationship. Most of the furniture had been bought together, each piece carrying a memory of reluctant strolls through furniture stores and the struggle of maneuvering them through their narrow front door. There was the stack of board games, the row of books they'd read that year lined up on the windowsill, the wobbly antique chair they had found at an estate sale and reupholstered together. On the couch lay the extravagantly expensive blanket they had both insisted was worth the cost. Because you can't put a price on comfort, all of it was inseparable from who they had been as a couple. She took the chair, the board games, the books, and the blanket and tossed them all into the suitcase. Underneath the blanket, she found David, a video game controller in his hand, a half-empty beer bottle resting against his hip. How many times had she come home to this scene? How many plans had been canceled over the years because he had gotten too drunk pre-gaming? Year 2. That had been a rough one. Their fights had shaken picture frames from the walls. She had thought about leaving at least a dozen times, but she never did. Instead, she had leaned into the headwinds of his addiction, stubbornly determined to help him conquer his demons. And he had. A sunbeam shimmered along a thin line of drool running from the corner of David's mouth. She gently picked up the beer bottle and set it on the coffee table, then lifted him and placed him in the suitcase. By then, Maude had started to feel overwhelmed by how little of their shared life was solely hers. Who was she without him? Who was he without her? She had invested so much of herself in him that she no longer remembered who she was, and if she didn't know, would anyone else? Laughter echoed from the kitchen. When she walked in, David was there with Alex and Britt, the couple they had befriended early on. The three of them wore matching red tie-dyed shirts that read Sea Cows, the name of the recreational soccer team they had joined as singles looking to meet new people. The four of them had quickly become two couples and then fast friends. As she pulled cooking dishes and favorite mugs from the cabinets, she watched David's familiar sheepish body language and remembered their first conversation at the bar after that first game. He had admitted that he struggled with social anxiety, that talking to people made him nervous. Except with her, he had said, even though they had just met, he hadn't been nervous at all talking to her. Maude thought about all the threads extending outward from their relationship into the network of friends they had built over the years. Would they side with him? Would they divide their friendships like assets in a divorce? How would she face them, knowing that most of them had never even known her as anyone but David's girlfriend? David's poor, pathetic girlfriend, who had hung on for 7 years waiting for a proposal that never came. When she finished in the kitchen, she noticed a spare, Sea Cow shirt draped over David's shoulder. She pulled it down and saw the large bleach stain on the collar that marked it as hers. She wondered if she would ever need it again before balling it up and tossing it into the suitcase. The 3 Sea Cows followed, placed inside with slightly more care. It was time to go. Before leaving, she surveyed the contents of the suitcase one last time. But no matter how deeply she searched, she couldn't find the explanation she had been looking for all along. Maude stayed with Lindsay for a while, spending much of her time in her room, sifting through the contents of the suitcase. She took it everywhere, even on the rare occasions when Lindsay convinced her to go out and socialize. Every night played out the same. Something would remind her of David, and the rest of the evening would be spent tearfully poring over the contents of the suitcase with anyone who would listen. She dragged the suitcase to work, took it with her when she visited her mother, even brought it along on dates when she thought she was ready to try that. After a while, people stopped asking why she still lugged that heavy piece of luggage around. In the absence of her relationship, it became what she was known for. And if she was honest with herself, the truth was she didn't know who she was without it. The suitcase remained a constant companion at Maude's side. But as the weeks turned to months, she became less aware of its weight, until one day it hardly weighed anything at all. On that day, she told Lindsay she might be ready to start looking for her own place. It was a bright spring day full of promise when she signed the lease on a charming one-bedroom flat overlooking a quiet city park. Afterward, the two women walked down the block to a coffee shop. It was a bohemian spot in the style Maude had always loved, with a bulletin board advertising band openings and social groups, a battered old couch, and a small stage for open mic nights. As they chatted excitedly about the possibilities of her new home, Maude felt something in her begin to unfold, and in the soft curves and sharp edges of that feeling, she glimpsed a piece of the puzzle of who she could be, someone who might just fit comfortably into a place like this. That night, Maude carried the suitcase out to the curb and rested it against a row of garbage cans. She had just turned away when a noise made her stop. There, in the dappled glow of a street lamp filtered through the branches of a ginkgo tree, a bent woman was struggling to drag the suitcase away from the curb. She looked up at Maude with pleading eyes as she pulled at the bag, her heels scraping against the pavement, breath hissing between clenched teeth, her face darkening with effort. Maude reached out and placed a gentle hand on the woman's shoulder, stilling her. "It's time to move on," she said. They sat together on the curb and opened the suitcase. As the contents spilled out onto the sidewalk, the woman began frantically pawing through the heaps of memories with an almost hysterical desperation. Maude watched with quiet pity as her searching took her deeper into the bag. Soon, only her legs were visible, and then, a moment later, she had disappeared entirely into the suitcase. When she was gone, Maude calmly gathered what had fallen out, returned it to the suitcase, and closed it. She kissed her fingertips and pressed them against the handle, then smiled. She felt lighter than she had in months, maybe even years. A laugh bubbled up from deep inside her as she drifted upward, rising through the branches of the ginkgo and into the night sky, until the brilliant lights of the city stretched below her, like a glimmering sea of endless possibility.